You did everything they told you to do. You built the career, collected the titles, achieved the version of success the world cheers for. And for a while it worked, until one day it didn't. There's a silence now, just beneath the noise of achievement. A strange ache that success can't quite silence. And you keep wondering why the winds don't feel like they used to. Let me ask you something. Have you ever stood in the center of a room that once made you proud? Your office, your home, the place that proved you'd arrived, and suddenly felt like a stranger there? If so, you're not broken, you're awakening. According to Deloitte, nearly 70% of high-achieving professionals in midlife report feeling emotionally disengaged despite material success. That's not burnout, that's disillusionment. Because what no one tells you is this: success isn't the peak. Sometimes it's the beginning of a much deeper climb. This is where the story turns, where achievement becomes emptiness, where the scoreboard changes, where what's next turns into what now. And here's the uncomfortable truth: success can become a socially sanctioned distraction, a treadmill dressed up as a triumph. You don't question it because everyone's clapping. But there's a part of you that no longer wants applause, it wants alignment. That voice inside, the one asking if this is all there is, that's not weakness. That's your future self knocking. That's your real life trying to begin. There's a moment many people face in midlife, though most won't admit it. You're offered one more opportunity, one more climb, a bigger title, better perks. And everything in you says yes, except the part of you that remembers what it's like to feel whole. You hesitate, and that hesitation, that's the door. The first half of life is about constructing a self. The second half is about uncovering the soul beneath it. That moment of tension, between more of the same and something utterly unknown, that's where the shift from success to significance begins. Let me ask you another question. When you look back, which moments will make you proud? The ones where you impressed people? Or the ones where you impacted them? Think about it. And if you've ever felt this pull away from proving toward meaning, drop a line in the comments. You're not alone in this. And your story might help someone else stop chasing what no longer fits. You did everything right. But now maybe it's time to do what's real. Most people spend the first half of life climbing the only mountain they know. The mountain of credentials, promotions, recognition, visibility. It's built on phrases like, what do you do? And where do you see yourself in 5 years? And to be fair, that mountain teaches you things. It gives you tools, structure, a name. But at some point, usually in the quiet aftermath of achievement, you reach a summit and realize you're not satisfied, you're exhausted. You've won, but something feels missing. That moment isn't failure, it's clarity. David Brooks, the author of The Second Mountain, describes it like this. You realize you've climbed the mountain everyone told you to climb, only to discover it's the wrong one. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist who studied human development, called this transition individuation, the process where your real self starts to emerge from under the mask you've built for the world. And Richard Rohr, a spiritual teacher of deep insight, wrote that the first half of life is about building the container. The second half is about discovering what it was meant to carry. The second mountain doesn't begin with a plan. It begins with a fracture, something cracks. The ladder you've been climbing breaks under your own weight. And for the first time, you see the world from a different angle, not from above, but from within. The first mountain asked you to prove yourself. The second mountain invites you to lose yourself in something greater. It's the difference between achievement and alignment, between success and significance. And you can't reach it by climbing faster. You reach it by stopping, listening, letting go of what no longer fits. There's a man most people have never heard of. Once a regional director at a multinational firm, he returned home to a small village in East Africa after being laid off during a restructuring. He could have tried to claw his way back to the boardroom. Instead, he used his skills to help rebuild his own community, starting small, planting trees, teaching youth how to run sustainable farms. No title, no public applause. But something strange happened. For the first time, he said he felt alive. "I thought I had been building a future," he told a friend. "But I was only building a resume." The second mountain doesn't care about your resume. It cares about your presence, your humility, your ability to serve without being seen. This is where your definition of meaning begins to evolve. You stop asking, "How can I get ahead?" You start asking, "Who could I walk beside?" This is also the point where many people turn back. Because the second mountain requires a kind of surrender the first never asked for. You might feel tempted to stay in the comfort of your achievements, to climb another familiar peak even if it leads nowhere, because it's what you know, because it feels safe. But here's the paradox. Everything that felt like loss at the summit of the first mountain, confusion, discontent, fatigue, is actually the soil for something greater to grow. This isn't the end of your story. It's the start of a deeper one. And what lies ahead isn't louder, it's more lasting. Not everything that glitters is gold. Sometimes it's a mirror. And when you see yourself clearly for the first time, not the version you've curated, but the one you've hidden, you realize the second mountain isn't something you climb, it's something you become. There's a point in the journey where your old life tries to pull you back. It usually happens just when you start to question it. The promotion call, the new opportunity, the next shiny rung, and a voice inside you whispers, "Maybe one more climb." That's when the map catches fire. There was a man, let's call him Anthony. He had everything. Strategy consultant. Global firm, 7 figures, smart, calculated, respected. On the day he turned 46, he received an offer to become regional CEO. It was everything he had worked toward, but something cracked. He delayed his response for 2 days, then 3. On the 4th day, he walked into his apartment, sat on the floor and cried. Not because he was overwhelmed, but because for the first time in his life, he didn't want what he had spent decades chasing. He didn't tell anyone right away. He just vanished from the circuit. 6 months later, he was in Bogota, teaching entrepreneurial strategy to underserved youth through a non-profit incubator. When a former colleague asked him what changed, he said, "I used to think my resume was my story. But I realized I'd never written my own script. I was just tracing someone else's map. That's the moment, not when you quit, not when you collapse. But when you finally admit that the map they gave you doesn't match the life you want to live. You stop running, not because you're done, but because you've finally realized you've been running in circles. The map said, climb. The soul says, turn around. This is where the journey towards significance begins, not with answers, but with ashes. Because everything that once guided you, ambition, admiration, linear progress, no longer tells the truth. And here's the paradox, the map got you here. But to move forward, you have to let it burn. Carl Jung called this the beginning of individuation. The moment the persona begins to break and something real begins to rise, not louder, but deeper. But burning the map doesn't come easy. Because that map gave you identity, direction, status, comfort. You weren't just following it, you were defined by it. So of course it hurts. But what you gain is something else entirely. You begin to notice the parts of you that were waiting, the voice you silenced, the gift you buried, the purpose you postponed until later, when you had time, when you were ready, when it felt safe. And that moment, the moment the smoke clears and you realize you're free, is terrifying, because now you choose, not the safe path, not the expected one, the one that calls to your soul. Let me ask you something. What part of your map is asking to be burned? What role, expectation, or story no longer fits the person you're becoming? Because maybe you didn't fail. Maybe you just outgrew the life that once fit you perfectly. And maybe that's not the end. Maybe that's the invitation. After the map burns, the world feels unfamiliar. You're no longer sprinting toward a goal. You're walking through fog, no guide, no voice in your ear telling you what to do next. Just you and something quiet flickering at the edge of awareness. That's when the lighthouse appears. Not one that towers in the sky or screams for attention. This one is nearly invisible. It doesn't illuminate the whole path, only enough to take one honest step. There's a story from the northern coast of Japan after the 2011 tsunami. A retired fisherman named Tetsuya lost his family, his home, and nearly his will to go on. But instead of leaving, he rebuilt a boat from salvaged driftwood. Not to fish, but to ferry supplies across to an isolated village no aid workers could reach. He didn't have a plan, he didn't want credit, he just listened. When someone asked him why he stayed, he said, "There was something I couldn't see, but I knew it was calling me." That's what the second half of life feels like, not a master plan, a quiet pull. In the first mountain, your direction came from the outside, deadlines, competition, reputation. But when you step off that treadmill, you realize how loud it was. And underneath that noise was something you couldn't hear until now, your inner knowing. The lighthouse doesn't appear for those who shout. It appears for those who are willing to become still. And sometimes it flickers in the strangest places. In the joy of teaching a child something they didn't think they could learn. In a small act of kindness you never talk about. In a skill you almost forgot you had because the world didn't reward it. It flickers when you stop asking, "What will they think?" and start asking, "What do I know in my bones is right?" This is where significance begins, not with a declaration, but with attention. There's an ancient Taoist proverb that says, "The sage does not seek to be seen. The sage becomes the seeing." This kind of purpose doesn't make headlines, it makes meaning. But this stage is dangerous too, because it's tempting to go back to the mountain, the title you wore, the life that made more sense. When the fog thickens, you'll want something to cling to. And the old map will try to sneak back in, telling you to be useful, be impressive, be efficient. But remember this, that old map will take you back to a place that can't hold the person you've become, and the lighthouse. It may not shout, but it won't lie. So pause, listen. Let go of the life that made sense for the one that makes you whole. The path to significance doesn't begin with certainty, it begins with trust. And the first step is taken not with confidence, but with honesty. Let me ask you something. If you stopped waiting for permission, what would you move toward? What light have you been pretending not to see? You don't need to chase it. You just need to stop turning away. You spent decades building a life. But let me ask you, will any of it still matter when you're gone? That's not a judgment, it's a shift. The moment the question stops being "what can I achieve?" and becomes "what can I give that lasts?" There's a Japanese word, ikigai. It means the reason you wake up in the morning. But it's more than that. It's what keeps you alive on the inside. And it often doesn't show up until the outer rewards stop working. There was a man, once a rising star in Silicon Valley, brilliant, sharp, restless. He sold his startup at 49. He could have launched another. Everyone expected him to, but he didn't. Instead, he moved to a coastal town where no one knew his name. He started showing up at the local high school, volunteering, teaching robotics, not for college prep, for kids who never thought they were smart. One of them, a 15-year-old girl with failing grades, went on to build a clean water sensor used in refugee camps. When asked why he stayed anonymous, he said because it was never about being seen. It was about helping someone else see. That's the pivot. Success asks, how do I stand out? Significance asks, who can I lift up? In the first half of life, you sow for recognition. But in the second, you start planting what no one sees, but someone else may one day need. Success is the harvest, significance is the seed, and seeds don't applaud, they take time. They disappear beneath the surface, they test your patience. But when they grow, they multiply. Here's the paradox, the less attached you are to legacy, the more meaningful your impact becomes. Not because your name gets remembered, but because your presence stays behind in quiet ways. In habits you helped shape. In beliefs you passed down. In someone else's courage. This is what it means to live beyond yourself. You stop being the centerpiece, you become the soil. So let me ask you plainly, what are you still watering that no longer grows you? And what's trying to bloom in you that you keep neglecting because it won't impress anyone? It's not too late to plant what lasts. And if this chapter speaks to you, drop one word in the comments: planting, just that. Let someone else scrolling know they're not the only one beginning again. You may never see the full garden, but someone will walk through it and feel home. By the time you realize what truly mattered, it might already be too late to chase it, but not too late to become it. You won't remember the meetings, the email threads, the polished elevator pitches. You'll remember the nights you stayed, the moments you listened, the quiet choices no one noticed but changed everything. That's the final turn. The shift from performing your life to embodying it. There's an old story passed down in southern Italy about a stonecutter who spent his entire life working on a cathedral he'd never lived to see completed. Tourists passed and asked, "Why would you give your life to something you'll never experience?" He smiled and said, "Because one day a child will walk inside and feel safe, and that's enough. That is significance." It doesn't need your name carved into a wall. It just needs your presence carved into someone else's story. Success is what the world sees. Significance is what someone feels when they remember you long after you've left the room. That's the second mountain. The climb no one can do for you. It doesn't begin with applause, it begins with surrender. With the question, what do I want to be remembered for? Not what you built, but how you made people feel in the process of building it. Not how loud you were, but how deeply you listened. The first mountain gave you direction. The second mountain gives you depth. The first asked you to become someone. The second asks you to return to who you already are. And the truth? You were never meant to carry success forever. You were meant to release it so your hands could hold something greater. The map is gone. The lighthouse flickers from within, the garden is waiting, and this is the life that leaves a mark. So here's my final question. What seed will you plant today that no one may see but someone may one day need? If this journey moved you, share it with someone standing at the edge of their second mountain, and in the comments, tell me, what are you choosing to climb now? Because success is impressive, but significance changes everything.